I'm curious to hear how you respond. So, whichever one comes to mind. The first one is, how was your web text innovative in the historical and or material technological contexts within which it was created? Go.
Oh, so let's see. I guess maybe I can start with the collaborative one, the expanding the space of face to face one with Pete Vandenberg and Katie Wozniak. I don't know how to think about it in terms of innovation. I think what was maybe unique about it at the time may have more to do with it being a piece of Writing Center scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of, at DePaul was doing some really cool, innovative stuff with audiovisual conferencing, because
Yeah.
DePaul has two main campuses in Chicago,
Right.
and they're both a few miles apart, but
Yeah.
then there are also several satellite campuses.
Mm-hmm.
So I started there as a master's student, and pretty much right when I started there, they were just beginning to pilot these programs because we had writing centers on the two main campuses, but not in any of the suburban
Right.
campuses. So we had to figure out a way to be able to serve students who wanted to work with the writing center but weren't about to make the however long commute down into Lincoln Park or the Loop.
Right.
So we set up webcams in some of the libraries at those campuses and tried piloting a program. And then I guess it was my second year in the program. That's when we actually started working on more of the scholarly side of things and trying to record those conversations. So actually what we just went through trying to record this conversation, it was
Right.
like that.
Yeah. Only 6 years ago must have been much worse. Yeah. Yeah.
It was because, like, not only was it difficult to find a program to conduct the tutorials in at the time, because when I started at DePaul, it was 2005, and by the time we were actually trying to do this on a larger scale and study it, it was 2006.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, Skype existed, but it wasn't great. And we didn't really have, it wasn't an option for us to use like the paid proprietary kind of tutoring systems that like Adobe had at the time, or I think Macromedia. So,
right. Remember them. Yeah.
There weren't terribly many options. We ended up using a program, I'm not even sure if it exists anymore, called SiteSpeed. Because at the time anyway, that allowed us to do remote desktop kinds of stuff. So if we were talking with a writer and they wanted to actually show us the Word document or show us something physically that they were doing and not hold it up to the camera, but something that lived on their screen, they were able to do that. So there was that for us, and also it was a free program. So it was just so much trial and error. And so I feel like that whole aspect is just sort of a wealth in and of itself in terms of what we had to do. And the other issue then we had was the screen recording, and we ended up using Camtasia for that. And at first it was just using the trial version, but then we were able to locate the funding to have stuff on computers at both the writing centers, but also in the suburban campus library. So we ended up recording a number of sessions, and it was hard to find participants just because, like, I think it's a challenge to do that kind of, it felt so new to people at the time. It feels weird saying that, but it did feel very, very new for students, and especially people who worked at the writing center, to be doing that, and then recording it as another layer was a whole issue unto itself. But when I looked at the web text this morning, and I don't know if it's my browser, but like the video embeds aren't working. So it could be my browser, it could just be the way that we embedded the QuickTime videos. The time no longer works. So even that's kind of funny to me that it's broken a little bit now. But what was really, I think, useful about that, for just in terms of writing center studies, was thinking about all of the issues that go into trying to create this kind of tutorial system. And it just brought up multiple access issues because
Yeah.
You know, it creates, in some ways, having these systems creates accessibility because, like, I mean, for us anyway, it was totally unrealistic to expect students to travel 2 hours to come into the Writing
Yeah.
Center.
Yeah.
So we really needed that particular system, but then, it's also hard to get people to use that particular system. And even thinking about all the things that can go wrong with technology, but also then thinking about modality, disability,
Yep.
like, there are so many different things. So we sort of ended that project by saying, like, here's what we did, but we're not necessarily recommending it. Like, we can't give wholesale recommendations.
Right.
It's more like we can talk through the process, and it's something that, the optimism surrounding these kinds of tutoring technologies really needs to be checked. Because I mean, for me, because I was such a young graduate student at the time, like, I had this sort of unbridled technological optimism going on, like, yes, shiny cameras, and then by the end of it, it was like, no,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
I never want to see a camera again.
Well, how did you make the decision when you all decided that you wanted to publish about what you had done to do it in the way that you did so that it ended up as a web text? I mean, I'm assuming it was more than just, hey, we can show some of the video,
Yeah,
although that was probably part of it. But
yeah, that was part of it, but I think you're right. The here's the video is a very tiny part of it. And I think it happened over several conversations because it started out, in the sense that Katie Wozniak and I were graduate assistants at DePaul. And so we wanted to, we were doing this as part of our employment, but also as part of an independent study we were
mm-hmm.
taking with Pete. And at least for me, I had started the master's program at DePaul, unsure of what I wanted to do afterward. At the time when I started, I was thinking of it as a stepping stone to an MFA program. I wanted to do creative writing.
Uh-huh.
And by my second year, I had transitioned into being a rhetoric and composition program. And for me,
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to pursue a PhD. So I think I had my own progression along those lines, and I think something similar was happening for Katie, where eventually we both kind of had some shifts just in terms of thinking what we would do as a creative. The appeal of rhetoric and composition to me was the digital aspect to it, in part because as an undergrad I started out as a computer science major,
mm-hmm.
and I dropped my second year just because the program I was in, it was so male dominated.
I've never heard that before from anybody. Yeah, yeah.
I was one of maybe like 5 women in the program. Like, it was just, it didn't feel like a disciplinary home to me. And so, like, in some ways, I think Rec Comp, like, it was like, it provided an avenue for me to return to things that I really had loved but had set aside because I just couldn't deal with that particular program. So, I think for us, it gave us an opportunity to really think through the field. But also, I think that, at least for me, it's just the way I think on some level. Like, I think there were certain affordances to having this structured as a web text beyond the video that might not have happened on the page. So there's a certain visuality to it.
Mm-hmm.
We were really thinking long and hard about sort of the visual metaphor, the interface for it, and we used Flash for that cover page. And Katie and I walked over to the dorms, talked to a couple of first-year students who said, yeah, you can photograph our dorm room. So that's what we did.
I was wondering.
We're photographing their dorm, and that ended up being the cover image. And for us, like, I think space was a really huge component of that particular study, and especially because of the tutorials we had recorded and conducted, there were always these moments where, sometimes you would become really engrossed in the conversation and you would forget that you were having brutally evident that this is what was happening. So, like, someone's doorbell would ring, or they would get up and walk away and bring back a bag of Cheetos or something. So there was something really domestic about it, and it was very different from a regular tutorial. So that's a long-winded answer, but
no, it makes me curious though, because I've been thinking about, as I've been reflecting on my piece and realizing that it's like 12, 13 years ago. Um, and thinking about affordances of then. And one of the things that struck out for me in that piece, and you just talked about, is how in these writing center conferences that they were talking with other people online. And yet the piece itself, talks about that, but doesn't feel very domestic and doesn't feel that way, So there's still a lot of the academic arrangement to your piece. There's that opening picture that you've talked about of the dorm room, and that sets up a really nice tone, but that's not carried through the rest of it. And I'm assuming that has to do with crap. There's not much we can do with this given constraints on time and sound and stuff. So it makes me wonder, if you were to redo that piece now, given what you know and given what you can do, if you would try to change the arranger to redesign it generally, if you were to do it now, given what's possible.
I think I would do it very differently now.
Uh-huh.
I mean, some of it has to do, I think, with thinking through the visual metaphor, the way people would engage with the text, but also some of it is more pragmatic issues. Like, I think I've come to somewhat despise the pop-up design,
Uh-huh.
where you click on something and then it's a page pop-up.
Right.
And at the time, I think that was kind of the rage. Like, it was the cool, hip thing to do.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So I think there's that. There's also the element of user control that I think isn't as much there in terms of what happens when you resize a page. Not good.
Right, yeah.
With that current